Just when you thought it was safe to go back in the cinema, Hollywood gives us not only another remake, but a remake of a film that is only just turning 10 years old this year. I am of course talking about The Amazing Spider-Man, which I saw last night, and immediately had to sit in front of the camera and review it because I have quite a lot to say about this movie. Now, I want to address the elephant in the room, basically. Obviously, Sam Raimi made a Spider-Man trilogy, a trilogy that I love, that I've hold very close to my heart. The reason being is I was 11 years old when the first Spider-Man film came out, and I very much grew up with it. Whether or not I thought that interpretation of Spider-Man was faithful to the comics is another matter, because I also read the comics, but I thought on film, and that is how you do Spider-Man. So going into this movie, I was really interested to see how director Mark Webb, this is the guy who did 500 Days of Summer, a film which, incidentally, I really don't like and never have. I was interested to see how he would tackle his first real big blockbuster movie, with only having kind of indie film credentials behind him. So I did have some expectation for this movie, but not a lot. I tried to avoid all the promotional material and didn't listen to any reviews. I spoke briefly with my friend Sam, the Lucha Media Geek, here on YouTube before going to see it. And going in, I expected maybe a more comical Spider-Man, a more sarcastic Peter Parker when he's in the suit, something a little more in line with the comics. And I know that now, having seen it, people have been, raving about Andrew Garfield from The Social Network playing Peter Parker, saying he's more faithful, he's more the Peter Parker that they imagine. Now, going in, I really didn't know what to expect, although I did want this to be good, and I have to say that I really just didn't like this movie. I managed to really separate myself from the Sam Raimi films because I wanted to be completely objective about this. I've read the comics since I was able to read, so while I do love Sam Raimi's movies, I accept that they're not completely faithful to the comics. I think some of the changes were for the better, some were more detrimental to the movies. This film really didn't work for me. There are certain things I like, certain things I don't, but to be honest, I just didn't like the movie as a whole. Now, what I want to do is go through what I liked and what I didn't. First of all, what I liked is the fact that the storyline, while it's telling Peter Parker's origins again, and really is there any need to tell his origins again, I think just about everybody on the planet knows how Spider-Man became Spider-Man. I like the fact that they focus the love interest aspect of the movie on Gwen Stacy, traditionally Peter Parker's first love. She's played by Emma Stone from Zombieland and Easy A, an actress who actually, when they announced they were rebooting Spider-Man, I thought she would be the perfect choice for Mary Jane. However, they've cast her as Gwen Stacy, and I have to say, she's pretty great. And I do like Andrew Garfield as Peter Parker as well, when he's sharing a scene with Emma Stone. I think the chemistry between the two of them is really quite charming and genuine. I think both actors are incredibly likeable, and the film is at its best when it's doing very little. I think the little glances and nuances of the performances when they're together, the awkward kind of teenage essence to the characters, is very, very apparent, and I think that's one of the film's main strengths. A lot is left unsaid between the characters, and I really, really liked the relationship, and to be honest, I could have stuck strictly with Peter Parker and Gwen Stacy and not had Spider-Man in the movie, and probably would have preferred it, actually. So that's an aspect I do like. The relationship between Peter and Gwen I found very genuine, very engrossing, and I cared about both the characters. I think visually the film, while it's shot on digital, and this does lead to some of the nighttime scenes looking quite cheap, and you always find this with digital, or at least I do, it never looks as good as 35mm film. It can look cheap, especially when the camera's moving, and I really didn't like the digital photography. However, some of the shots that Mark Webb chooses are quite astounding. There's some POV shots from Spider-Man. Bits and pieces like this were pretty incredible. The only problem is, especially when you've got the scenes swinging through New York, we've seen this done before by Sam Raimi, and to be quite honest, we've seen it done better. I mean, Sam Raimi was a very assured, very experienced director when he took on the Spider-Man movies, and this one does feel kind of rough around the edges in terms of how Mark Webb directs the action. Now, that's bound to happen because this is his first big film, and you do find sometimes with an indie director taking on a big property that the kind of rough aspects of it and the messy aspects of it can lend to its charm, but with this, it felt like it was poorly edited. The action scenes, you couldn't really tell what was happening and were overall quite disappointing, to be honest. But again, I mean, I do like some of the shots he chooses, so that's another thing I like. The main thing that I took from this movie that I really enjoyed was the score. I thought the score, I think it's James Horner who composed it, was absolutely fantastic, and it's very robust and bombastic when it needs to be, and there's certain scenes when Spider-Man is being stalked by the villain in this picture, the Lizard, where the score is reminiscent of old, like, 1940s horror movies with what I'd like to refer to as jagged piano. I thought this score was very effective and worked very well. The only problem with it is there is no march that you will leave the cinema humming. There's no theme of, like, Superman or Batman, Tim Burton's Batman. There's no real theme to the score, but it is very effective as it's playing under the scenes. What else did I like? The fact that they tried to expand on Peter Parker's origins with the whole relationship with his parents and the mystery surrounding them. The fact that they tried to do it, I quite liked. Because if you're going to remake a film that's only 10 years old, you need to do something different. However, the execution was fairly poor. It builds up to the plot line that we're going to find out about Peter's parents, but we never really do. Some is alluded to, some isn't, and it feels like maybe big chunks of that storyline were edited out of the movie. The fact that it tries to do a little bit different, I appreciate that, but the fact that it really doesn't amount to anything, I thought, what is the point in having this in the film if you're not actually going to resolve it? And now people will make the argument, well, they'll come back to that in the sequel and they'll tackle that in number 2, but they shouldn't. I don't like this whole approach that films are no longer standalone movies. They're lead-ups to sequels or they're crossovers and all the rest of it. It's like, I think it worked with what Marvel did with the Avengers, because those movies, or at least most of them, worked as standalone movies before the Avengers came out. With this, it feels like just a load of sequel bait and leading up to a sequel that, to be honest, I really don't care if they make a number 2. I found the sequel baiting to be quite lazy, and it's really irritating, the fact that they're reliant on a sequel in order to tell the story. And no, you should have the film be standalone, 3-act structure. You should resolve the conflicts, maybe leave a couple of strands for the sequel if you know you're going to make one, but don't just rely on a sequel to tell the story. That's lazy, sloppy filmmaking and storytelling. The aspects of the film I don't like, as you can tell, there are quite a few, because I'm kind of chomping at the bit to get these out. The dialogue, for the most part, was very stilted and wooden. I found some of the conversations between the characters to be distractingly bad. Lines said out of context. It's hard to explain, but it feels like certain lines of dialogue have been cut out of these conversations to give them a faster pace, but what you're left with is dialogue that has no real context to it and doesn't make any sense. For the most part, I found that to be the case. However, there are certain scenes, especially between Peter and Gwen, that are really well done and well acted, well written. I really enjoyed. The Aunt May and Uncle Ben relationship, you've got Martin Sheen as Uncle Ben. I thought he was nothing short of dreadful as Uncle Ben. He was almost... The way Martin Sheen plays it is very almost kind of camp, and overacting the Uncle Ben, you know, apple pie America kind of aspect of it, and I really didn't like it. To be honest, I vastly prefer the original Uncle Ben. The actor's name who played the original is escaping me at the moment, but I just found with Uncle Ben and Aunt May there was no chemistry whatsoever between the three of them, and with Peter Parker there was just no chemistry. Aunt May, Sally Field, I believe, was given nothing to do or say. They allude to a more interesting character through what Uncle Ben says, like, oh, I pity the kid who suffers her wrath, but you never really expand on this. You never get to know these characters particularly well. I think this is only highlighted in a scene where Peter Parker Parker listens to a voicemail from Uncle Ben, which is a really poorly written, wooden speech by Martin Sheen that you think he's going to lead up to "with great power comes great responsibility." That line is never uttered in the movie, and in trying to replace it with this voicemail speech is just so awkward. I can't tell you enough how awkward that scene was, and just completely unnecessary too. I thought the villain in this movie, played by Rhys Ifans, he plays the Lizard, who in the previous 3 movies was played by Dylan Baker from Happiness fame. Far better actor, if you ask me. I'm not a fan of Rhys Ifans. I always find him to be quite wooden. As the Lizard, I thought he was fairly terrible, to be honest. He is wooden and stilted. He looked bored as Curt Connors. His motivations as well are absolutely unclear, and while people who watch my videos a lot will know that I really like ambiguity in movies if it's done well. With this, it's almost like the writers couldn't be bothered giving Curt Connors clear motivations for becoming the Lizard and wanting to wreak havoc on New York City. And I thought the way Rhys Ifans plays it, he looked like he just would rather be anywhere else, and I really, really didn't like him as the Lizard. I would have far preferred to see what Dylan Baker did with the role. There are certain scenes, another scene I really loved actually was where Spider-Man builds a web in a sewer and uses it as a sonar to figure out where the Lizard is. That was clever. That was really, really clever and very well executed. But overall, the scenes between Spider-Man and the Lizard when they're fighting, the CG is impressive, but I think, and this comes with Mark Webb's inexperience of directing action, it's very difficult to tell what's happening. It looks like a computer game and you can't get a grasp. The camera's moving so fast, you can't get a grasp on what's going on. And obviously Sam Raimi, being a much more assured director, and his framing was spot on and the action was very well directed in the other 3 movies. Spider-Man 3 obviously was not that good, but I'm referring mainly to the first 2. So I found the action to be very kind of haphazard and choppy. Although the practical effects were quite brilliant, there are certain scenes where Spider-Man's swinging and jumping on top of moving vehicles and stuff, and they used real stunt people for that on harnesses, and the practical effects were amazing, you know, not taking anything away from those, but the CG was disappointing. The overall film, it does feel like a comic book origins movie by numbers. It doesn't do enough different. It really doesn't put a personal stamp on it. Like with Sam Raimi, if you didn't know who had made those 3 Spider-Man movies, you would figure it out within 5 minutes. There's no kind of personal stamp from Mark Webb. It feels like he's got a checklist of things that the producers liked from Sam Raimi's movies and wanted to keep. So the inner monologue of the villain, and the New Yorkers coming to the rescue of Spider-Man, which was cheesy in the Raimi movies, but it knew it was cheesy and they played on that, whereas in this it's just kind of cringe-inducing. It's like they have a checklist and they're ticking off things that they want to keep from the previous 3 movies while trying to make this grounded and real. Now, I know that a lot of people have praised Andrew Garfield as Peter Parker because he is the witty, sarcastic Spider-Man that we've all wanted. I have to say that is a completely inaccurate representation of the film. There is about 1 scene involving a car thief that we've all seen in the trailers where Spider-Man is witty and sarcastic. For the rest of the movie, there's not really any of that. There's 1 scene, and it was the same in Sam Raimi's movie. There was 1 line in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man that really alluded to that character, and there is 1 scene in this movie that alludes to that character, and the sarcastic, witty, funny Spider-Man is only present for 1 scene, so while people rave over that, it feels like they didn't commit to making the character that way, and would rather stick to what Tobey Maguire did 10 years ago. So that's another complaint. I know people are praising it for that, but I feel that is completely inaccurate. There are also scenes that feel like they're building to a bigger picture but really go nowhere, when Spider-Man's trying to take pictures of the Lizard and you think, oh, maybe this will lead to the Daily Bugle, but it doesn't really go anywhere. I'm trying to avoid spoilers because if you haven't seen this movie, you know, I would suggest give it a chance. This may be the Spider-Man for you, but it's not the Spider-Man for me. I really wasn't impressed. Peter Parker, Andrew Garfield is a good actor. I do like Andrew Garfield. However, I think he is too good looking and cool for Peter Parker. The reason being is, what was nerdy 10 years ago is not nerdy now. Now the whole you know, floppy haired, pouty lipped, doe-eyed, skinny jeans that was geeky is now cool. And Peter Parker looks cool. I mean, he has no problem, you know, really talking to girls. He has no problem standing up to bullies before he's gotten his powers. He's just like a normal teenager, and Peter Parker should be a nerdy. I'd have preferred the way Tobey Maguire played that aspect of him. And I just thought Andrew Garfield, while he is good in the suit, and there are aspects of Peter Parker's personality that he does really well, he's too cool for Peter Parker for me. And I know that sounds like a kind of really geeky criticism, but this is a franchise that I'm very passionate about. I love Spider-Man, so I really wanted to get into this. What else did I like? I quite like Dennis Leary as Captain Stacy. The fact that he's polar opposite of Spider-Man, wants him locked away. I found his character arc to be quite interesting. Although some of the choices he makes are really quite bizarre, putting himself in harm's way when there's really no need to. I think that it alludes to the fact that Norman Osborn, obviously the Green Goblin, is playing a bigger role behind the scenes. I mean, you see the trailer, it's all set in the Oscorp building, so that's not really a spoiler. There is a scene after the credits that alludes even more to a bigger picture that's going to be developed in the sequels, and I just think it's lazy writing. It definitely feels, especially towards the end of the movie, the second half of the movie feels like there are large chunks missing, scenes missing. It feels like the development of the relationship between Aunt May and Peter Parker once Uncle Ben has died. It needs to be developed more. It feels like all that was cut out. It feels like the Lizard, if he has any coherent motivations, they're not in the movie. I found the whole Uncle Ben death scene to be quite trite and awkward and fell flat for me, no pun intended. And the revenge mission by Spider-Man to find the person responsible, that plotline is just dropped and never brought up again. So it feels like, and I know people are going to say, well, it's for the sequel, but to be honest, I think it's really lazy writing and filmmaking when they rely on a sequel to finish telling the story. I don't think you should do that. I think you should make more of an effort to make a coherent standalone movie, and if it does well and you want to make a sequel, then develop it further then, but the movie should stand alone. I found the final confrontation between Spider-Man and the Lizard to be very boring and by the numbers. It's a scene we've seen so many times before, not only in Marvel movies like Iron Man and Iron Man 2, it's just a confrontation by the numbers, New York in peril, you know, the superheroes coming in to save the day. It was poor. This is a poor movie, and while it's different to Sam Raimi's movies, I think people are being overly kind because it seems to be cool to bash Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. You know, you suddenly have people coming out of the woodwork saying, oh, well, I don't like Tobey Maguire as Spider-Man, blah, 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 this, you know, I prefer Andrew Garfield, and I think then I don't see how you can say that Tobey Maguire was bad as Spider-Man. It was a different interpretation of a character, as is this. Personally, on film, I think Tobey Maguire's interpretation of Spider-Man works better. Doesn't match what's in the comics, but films and comics, separate mediums, different beasts. There needs to be some artistic license. Overall, The Amazing Spider-Man, for me, was amazing in how disappointing it was. It has its moments. The relationship between Peter and Gwen is quite engrossing and interesting. The practical effects are amazing. It's got a terrific score, albeit it lacks a march. The action is quite laboured and the dialogue is stilted. The CGI is confusing. The plot is almost non-existent. Plot strands are dropped seemingly at random. It's an incoherent mess. And to be honest, it feels like there is probably a longer, more coherent cut of the film, maybe floating around somewhere. Hopefully we may get to see that on DVD or Blu-ray. But the film as it stands is poor, and I was incredibly disappointed with The Amazing Spider-Man, and I really wanted to like it. But I just, as a film, as a standalone movie, if you forget about Sam Raimi's movies, if you forget about the comics, and you watch this movie, it just doesn't stand up for me. In a world where we've seen superhero origins told so much better than this, it feels incredibly outdated considering it's a reboot. So I really didn't like The Amazing Spider-Man, which is a shame because I wanted to. But that's my review. Please feel free to leave comments. I'll be interested to hear what everybody else thinks of this. If you don't agree with my review, that's absolutely fine. Obviously, everybody has a different opinion. I'll be interested to hear what you guys think, though, so please, let me know. Thank you for watching all 20 minutes of this. It's more of a rant than a review. I look forward to hearing from you all. Thank you, and goodbye.